Hi, and welcome everyone. I wanted to introduce this afternoon's session, which is on STOPS, a journey of grassroots overdose prevention from Northeastern Ontario. Looking forward to it. I'm just going to keep my camera off here as I'm struggling with some connection issues. And we want to save all that for the speakers. So I just want to remind folks at the end, we will be having an evaluation pop up. So please take your time to fill that out and give your feedback. The hosts have agreed to answer questions throughout if it seems appropriate. So please just post up your questions as they arise. If we don't get to them during the presentation, we'll set some time aside afterwards to address everyone's questions and comments. Our speakers today are Crystal Kimewon, Karla Ghartey, and Marie Pollock. Karla Ghartey is a community health nurse, educator, and community advocate. Karla was born and raised in Sudbury, Ontario, and after living and learning all over the world, she has returned home. She has had the privilege of working with STOPS since its inception in 2019. Marie Pollock has 40 years of lived experience combining substance use, homelessness, and the knowledge of street survival with community care. For the past 8 years, she's integrated her experience into the field of community work and is a founding member of the Sudbury Temporary Overdose Prevention Site. And I'm sure we'll get to know Crystal here as we move through our session. So thank you so much, everybody, and I'll turn the session over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, early evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our talk today on STOPS, a journey of grassroots overdose prevention from Northeastern Ontario. My name is Karla Ghartey, and I know that a land acknowledgement came up at the beginning of the session, but we also have one prepared for us. So I'm gonna start with that today. So as a settler, I am a guest on this land, and I'm grateful to meet here and thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. In particular, I acknowledge the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and recognize that the city of Sudbury is located on the traditional lands of the Atikameksheng Anishinaabe and also the Wanapatei First Nations, or its traditional name, Wanapatang, meaning place where the water is shaped like a tooth. They are descendants of the Ojibwe, Algonquin, and Ottawa nations. This land contains many freshwater lakes and boreal forests and provides an abundance of beautiful natural resources. Those of you who are also settlers on this land, please take a moment to look down onto the land in which you are standing. Think about its history and its future and acknowledge that. It is all of our sacred obligation to respect, honor, and sustain this land for the generations that come after us. I recognize the contributions of Indigenous persons to this land I now occupy and commit to the truth and reconciliation calls to action in my community, including advocating for change and better recognition of Indigenous healing practices, accessible healthcare, and the rights of Indigenous persons. So we'd also like to acknowledge our financial support. We receive no funding from any outside organization. We receive funding from private citizens who care about our community, and we have no potential conflicts of interest, and we have no other disclosures to reveal to you today. We just want to start off today by giving you a little bit of a picture of what our community is going through in terms of the opioid poisoning crisis. So this is a slide, this is a graph from our public health Sudbury district, so our health unit in our region, and it just shows you the number of emergency visits, hospitalizations, and deaths that have been dramatically increasing over the years, especially since 2018, due to the opioid poisoning crisis in our community.
I just want to add to this slide also that this does not include the overdose deaths, both in our federal and provincial institutions.
Yes, that's very important. Thank you, Marie. This next slide is similar to showcase the involvement of STOPS and its importance in our community, because as you can see from this, Public Health Sudbury Districts has the highest per capita rate of overdose deaths in the province. And if you do look a little bit closer, you will notice that the top 4 out of 5 locations of the highest overdose deaths in the province are all located in Northeastern Ontario. And thus far, we are the only unsanctioned or sanctioned overdose site that exists in this region. So the birth of STOPS, how did we begin?
Well, there was a bunch of us that came together and noticed that the overdose deaths were rising drastically and very quickly. And we also noticed that other places here in Ontario that were developing overdose safe injection sites and how beneficial they were. And the knowledge and education that they were trying to share and to break down barriers of substance use and awareness of the toxicity of our drug supply nowadays, especially during a COVID. Um, what some of our challenges was location, trying to find a place, the legalities of having an unsanctioned site, access to supplies, especially during a COVID lockdown, was very challenging. Um, Also, nothing like this has ever been done up here in Northeastern Ontario. The public backlash that we would be receiving.
That we did receive, actually, especially from some of our city councilors and community action networks. We attended some meetings, and the rhetoric in those meetings was actually quite negative towards what we were doing. And that was very difficult for many of us to try and navigate. But as you'll see further on in the presentation, the tides have started to change, which is great.
Funding was a huge issue as well, and trying to find enough people that would be able to volunteer their time to work with us.
And not be scared of the backlash, whether it be through their employers or through even their families or their friends or their communities, because what we were doing was very, I would say, rebellious, but actually super important.
Okay, so.
But as a positive, we did have a lot of successes from the beginning, because of our group and involving people with lived and living experience from the very beginning. We had these strong relationships in our community. We were able to have a successful fundraiser to help buy certain supplies that we needed, not harm reduction supplies, but like supplies such as a trailer and heaters. And we had various community groups and various individual persons donate to us. We're all very passionate about the persons in our community, especially those that are dealing with substance use issues and homelessness. And we just wanted to build it from the ground up. And also we have from the beginning have had a lot of positive media exposure through certain reporters that have really tried to tell the community what we were doing from a really positive place. So we're really grateful for that.
One of another success is that it brought a lot of people with lived experience and people with the education part come together at the table and find a medium so that we can work together and share all knowledge and experiences and make a difference. So that was groundbreaking, big time.
Yeah. So this is how we started. Pretty simple. Tents, drug buffet out of paper cups, some tarps, and some barriers to help preserve some semblance of privacy and confidentiality. It was simple, but it worked. This is just more of a kind of an academic kind of component here. When you look at where STOPS is coming from and how we evolved, you can really relate it to the community as partner model. So for those of you who have never heard of this before, it's very focused on community strengths and building upon the community's assets, thus community empowerment. So it's about collaboration and partnerships, especially with other agencies, with people with lived and living experience, with clinicians, and with other members of the community. It's a very action-oriented systems and upstream approach. It is very much built upon trust. It's basically a synthesis of public health and nursing. And the biggest part of the community as partner model is the notion that no one knows what is best for the community except the community members themselves. And that's a really essential part of the service that we are trying to provide with STOPS. So another thing, this is just a visual representation for anybody who likes to see it in a different version. So this model basically focuses on health promotion. And as you can see in the core is persons or the community in the middle. The collaborative approaches of the model guide community and research partners to interconnect and move flexibly through all partnership phases, thereby facilitating sustainability and community self-advocacy. So like I said, the core of the assessment wheel represents the people who make up the community. And then you have the environment is divided into the 8 subsystems, which you can see above. So those 8 subsystems include physical environment, education, safety and transportation, politics and government, health and social services, etc. The line around the core represents the population's health status or normal line of defense. The line around the subsystems represents the community's normal line of defense. And there are lines of resistance that are strengths and assets that act to defend the community core from penetration by stressors. And stressors are the little stars that you see there, and they're risk factors that threaten or cause tension and disrupt community function. So like I said, this model is built predominantly upon partnerships. And in addition to working with people with, clinicians such as myself, people with lived and living experience, such as Crystal and Marie, we also have formed partnerships with our public health sub-region districts, our municipal leaders, other community agencies that may or may not provide harm reduction, the police, but I'd like to emphasize that this is at an arm's reach. They do not accompany us at our sites. They are there. We have communication with them, but like I said, it's at an arm's reach. We do have a relationship with our hospital here, Health Sciences North. We have relationships with Cambrian College and Laurentian University, especially in the form of taking nursing students. And we also have lots of relationships with harm reduction organizations within our community, such as OHAS and SASI. So this is some of our original stats from May 24th to July 4th, 2019. The important thing to keep in mind is that when we did first start, we were only open once a week because that's all we could really do based out of our capacity. So as you can see, we did have, a number of people that visited our site. The majority of them were male, between the ages of 19 and 39, and most identified as having some Indigenous background, whether it be Métis, Inuit, or First Nations. And the majority of substances that were being consumed at that time was mostly opiates through the primary method of injection drug use.
And I'd like to add that since we started up with our site, we have not had any deaths.
And that's important to emphasize because a lot of people have said, do you know what you're doing? What's your liability? And, you shouldn't be reacting. And if we don't react, there's a possibility that someone can die. But if we do react, then there's a possibility that myself as a clinician could possibly, lose my nursing license. I don't really think that that's a fair double-edged sword to present to somebody.
Well, they thought also, too, because we're there handing out harm reduction supplies, that we were encouraging drug use and encouraging overdoses when, in fact, it's quite the opposite.
And we all know that, I think, everybody that's listening today. At least hope so. Have a bit of a hiatus from March 2020 to December 2020. Even though we were only operating once a week, we are all volunteers. We all have other obligations, whether it be jobs, family obligations, other voluntary community obligations. We got very burnt out with the lack of support that we were getting from the public, from community, not from the people who utilized our service, but just in general. The weather was very cold. It was hard for us to maintain a heat source and find a place to go because we were kind of being shifted to a number of different sites throughout the city.
I think, though, part of that break also was it gave us a chance and an opportunity to rejuvenate, to rest, up our game, come up with some training strategies and whatnot, reach out further into community. Because once we were known that we were out there, people were interested on wanting to be educated and know exactly what we were doing. Plus, we had tremendous amounts of losses here up in the north.
And that was escalating. And just as we were about to just as we were ending, our hope was to do a little bit of a community consultation to see what people liked about our service, what people didn't like about our service, what they wanted to change and maintain. And we did a call out to the community, and this included people who lived in the community, people who utilized our service, a bit of both. We tried to have we were planning on having 3 open forums. We managed to have 1, and then COVID hit. But the next slide, the one that you can see here that's coming up, this is the flyer that we distributed around the community to try and encourage people to come and tell us some things about our service. So after our hiatus, we did have a chance to, like Marie said, rest and rejuvenate. And then we had to start back up our service. The escalation of deaths was increasing dramatically. The worsening of the opioid poisoning crisis, especially with the presence of COVID, made accessing services really, really difficult. So it was really challenging, and we saw that we just had to start again. That, you know, the reason why we started before is the exact same reason why we needed to start again. I just see a question in the chat here that says, do you think more men accessing your service was a reflection than more men use opioids or women not accessing this service? Is it a women-friendly service?
Yes, it is. But as we all know that for a lot, that's why my opinion on this is that we should have not just a co-ed, but we should also have one for male and one for females, because there are safety issues when it comes to women. And we know that a lot of our women out there are involved in sex work and have lots to be secretive about, being a single mother, fleeing an abusive person or persons relationship, all those things. So it's more acceptable socially to see men than it is women. So my strong belief is, and much needed, is women need their own space for many different reasons than the men do. And then also, I just want to add to the restart. Like we said earlier, most of our folks are mainly Indigenous. And then we were able to bring in Crystal Kimewon, right, with her expertise.
I can speak to a little of that. Sorry, my bio was not in there. I guess I didn't submit it. My name is Crystal Kimewon. I am within STOPS as a peer with lived experience with substance use. And I'm also here as an Indigenous woman who holds a BSW and studying for her MSW. So, but I like to think myself first as a peer. When I returned to Sudbury, I was studying down south in the Toronto area, and I returned to Sudbury at a time when COVID was at its height. I guess we were in the third wave, second wave-ish coming off. Yeah. So my brother had been volunteering here, as well as another Indigenous male. We'll jump into those slides later. But the need and the lack of service provision that we saw everywhere was definitely felt by individuals who were using substances and struggling with homelessness. I felt at a much higher rate. I came in, I was viewed as the breath of fresh air, coming out of studies, kind of out of frontline harm reduction, but also bouncing back from a very lengthy relapse myself. And I regard myself as a woman who walks in her truth. I'm rooted in my Anishinaabe ways and teachings. And when I left Sudbury, I was passionate about homelessness, harm reduction. I still very much was, but I was struggling with my own stuff. Came into STOPS, and whoa, the need was there. The capacity of STOPS. I want to say you were struggling. The the group was really struggling. Everyone was tired. There was so much loss, as Marie mentioned earlier. And we just needed fresh eyes, I guess you would say, right, Karla? What I found in coming in is I was pushed to the fore. And rightly so, everyone was experiencing their own burnout, the peers, our social workers, our nurses within stops. The need was very high. The resources that were out there, SASI, OHOS, and our existing organizations within Sudbury were functioning at limited capacity because of COVID. Stops was different in a way where we're primarily peer-led. So these are individuals from the community that are of the community. So our approach to working with folks was less limited, I guess you could say. I don't know what else I can really say to that, aside from there was a lot that needed to be done, a lot of organization, a lot of just leadership, I guess. And that's where I came in. Now, coming into stops, though, I was 2 months after losing my own partner to overdose. Opioid and cocaine overdose, intentional overdose. So this is what I was coming into stops from. Just getting back up on my feet, rooting myself in my Indigenous ways of being and doing, dealing with my own grief, and recognizing my community needs me, needs us. And I stepped up and here I am. So that's what I can say about that. You can jump to the next slide there, Karla.
So these are just some pictures of when we were operating in a privately owned parking lot. This was when we were open 1 day a week. So we had permission from a private owner because we weren't allowed to be on any city-owned land because bylaw would and had shut us down previously. So we brought our little green trailer. We set up an ice fishing hut. We had a generator with a couple heaters, some people dropping off food, some volunteers, and off we went for 6 to 8 hours a day, once a week.
Regardless of a lockdown.
Regardless of a lockdown. So this is doing some oxygen training with all of us around. And then after about 2 months, we got enough volunteers and we started to do nightly provision. And because we were portable, we were in an area, in an underground parking lot by our YMCA. And even though it was on city land, we just said, screw it. This is where people are. This is where the need is most prevalent. And this is where we're going to be. And that's where we stayed for a couple of months, was in that parking lot. Whether they evicted people from that area who were living in that area or not, we stayed, we never left. Those conversations with the city continued with bylaw. We always tried to do our best to advocate for folks and protect our folks that were utilizing our service.
I just want to say the reason why I say regardless of a lockdown is because substance use doesn't come on a clock. It's not a 9 to 5, 5 days a week. It's 24/7. And the real pandemic, in my opinion, is it wasn't COVID. It was people dying. So regardless of a lockdown, doing what needs to be done.
This is just a quick slide of a public service announcement that we put out on our Facebook page. We were having some issues in our community with people who were dealing with substances and homelessness concurrently being filmed. And there was an issue about consent that was happening and being broadcast over Facebook and stuff like that. So Stops felt it was important to put out a public service announcement about the importance of privacy and confidentiality and respecting people in our community. So we just wanted to give you an example of one of the things that we were able to produce by one of our members who is very talented from a graphic design standpoint.
Yeah. Also, I'm sure when one is having an overdose and they can't breathe and whatnot, they are definitely not giving consent to you making a video. So that was a big no-no. And that was a huge thing that was going on up here in the north, making music videos and such like that. It got to the point where I myself made a threat to a social media, and it is what it is. This is not fun and games. Overdose deaths are not fun and games. It's serious.
And one of the videos did showcase someone receiving CPR as they were overdosing. So it was pretty graphic, and it was to a song that a community member had sang or produced or whatever. So this is what our service has been looking like lately. So setting up, just especially with the warmer weather, it's been a little bit easier. Setting up a simple tent and table and chairs, and handing out simple harm reduction supplies, and being where people are at. So we've been under the YMCA. We've also been in a park that is often lived in and frequented by people who use substances. People will go there also to purchase substances. So very active part of the city. So we try and keep it simple and just get the job done. And I think that's what we've managed to do.
And with the warmer weather and the lift of COVID, we were able to access better to harm reduction supplies and services in community. And kits, getting them kits done.
Mm-hmm. So this is just a slide to show the proven need in our community. So, there is a large amount of intravenous drug use in our community, but there's also a lot of consummation of substances in a lot of different forms, including inhalation, snorting, oral ingestion. And it's very interesting, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware that in Ontario, Inhalation Services are not a part of the sanctioned supervised consumption model, which all of us believe is a missing component that is going to also cause some overdose deaths.
Well, it also sends out mixed information that most ODs are people who inject drugs. In my opinion, in my experience, I've seen more overdoses with smoking than I have injection. So I think it's very important to have inhalation access to these sites needs to be implemented, because you don't need to inject to overdose. It doesn't matter which way you consume. Consumption is consumption, and overdose is an overdose. Give them that space.
So is our service being used? So these are just some quick stats from when we were open once a week. So we did provide services to 49 persons. Those can also be repeat statistics. And during that time, we reversed one overdose while we were open on a weekly basis. We were also seeing more instances of wound care during that time. The next slide talks a little bit about more of our recent service. And while the documented services for 43 people doesn't actually seem like a lot, we would often be set up with our table. And because of the location in which we were situated, there were people using all around us. So it's not like we could get up with our stats and say, "Excuse me, hi, can I get your code name and what you're using and your age?" And people would just be like, "What?" It came to be known that we were going to be there, that people knew where we were going to be, and that was a safe space. And we would be constantly walking around and observing the area and responding and meeting with people and communicating with people, handing out supplies. In that space, we're meeting people where they were at. So this doesn't really showcase the number of things that we've actually done and the number of people that we've actually met. But we also have reversed 6 overdoses at the actual site, but that also does not capture the number of overdoses that we've reversed outside of that particular space.
I'd like to give an example. One day, I believe it's the day that the 3 of us attended to an overdose. Within my hour and a half or 2 hours waiting to do my shift, 4 overdoses. Mm-hmm. 4 overdoses. 1, 3 of us did together.
And I think I was at home at the time, and they called me, and I drove down because I'm 5 minutes away to help navigate. Because while we do have some amazing members of our medical community, including EMS, nurses, and physicians, there's always that defensive mechanism that many of us put up to protect our persons who are having acute medical events, and sometimes they're treated great, but a lot of the times it's not so great. So we are also there to advocate for them in any way that we can. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of we were busy and we are busy.
Okay, fancy word here. I say Indianness, indigeneity, and stops. Now, I have some work experience with an organization in Toronto, safe consumption site within Toronto. Toronto is far more diverse and multicultural than Sudbury is. Any northern community, it's either white and brown. Primarily, we're getting a little more diverse within Sudbury now. So the overrepresentation of Indigenous people who are within our using community is very high, very, very high. Those who self-report. I wanted to jump to the question that was asked earlier about is our service women friendly? Here's what I've noticed. Now, I'm bringing with me my lived experience as an Indigenous woman who has faced multiple years, countless, hundreds of years of colonization, intergenerational trauma. My own trauma I carry as a woman. When you're on the street and you're struggling with addiction, it finds you in sex work, it finds you in all sorts of places. What I have found and what I see is, and what I have done myself is, we often have someone who is taking care of us out there in some way, shape, or form. Somebody that is going to go to the supply and get our gear for us. Knowing that when we're out there, we're vulnerable. So you're not going to see me as a woman accessing services as frequently as a man would. As a woman also, I am more prone to seeking help, to accessing services, because maybe I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. Women tend to be more emotional beings. I'm more prone to seeking help and services than a male would be. And I've seen that within social work. I've seen that within my own family system. Many of our men still carry that intergenerational trauma. So I hope that answers a little bit of that question there. Within Sudbury, a lot of our girls are 3 or 4 to a tent, and it's there is women who come out. They're the street smart ones. Marie would be the one that would go, I'm going to go and get the stuff. You stay here safe. We always have those pillars within the community. Now, talking about the representation, I think we talked about that. Incorporating cultural medicines, I think, is very important. When I came into Stops, it would have been May because I lost my partner in April. I returned back to Sudbury. I just up and left. I left Toronto. And Toronto was life with my partner. I came home, went to the sweat lodge, I picked up my ceremony, and I went back to my heart work. This is my heart work. This is where, I thrive. Now, when I came in, my brother was volunteering with Stops. There was another, we call them shkabewis. So they are our traditional helpers. Now, the advantage of our shkabewis within Stops, our male helpers, is that they too have a lived experience. Now, they've done they've walked a part of their healing, but they still walk in both of those worlds. So one of the things that Stops has been able to do, and I thought this was amazing when I looked in our supply kit, my first night out, was tiny little smudge kits. You can get like supplies at the dollar store, little abalone shells, little tiny dime bag of sage, Marie would be more familiar with the terminology here. But we have like a little dime bag of smudge and a little bucket of matches, and it's all together and it's there. And we encourage the use of our cultural practices and traditions, irregardless of the lifestyle you're choosing. And this is something that I've learned too, is we don't ever turn away people who are intoxicated or under a substance from ceremony, because our spirit needs to be there. Our being needs to be there. That is why they're there. That is why we're here. So that's one thing I really commend Stops in being able to do, is given the, brown white mentality up here, and there is still a lot of discrimination. There is still a lot of even overt racism. I've felt it in my advocacy work and just as an Indigenous mother. So that's one amazing thing. We'll jump to the next slide. I know you're in control there, Karla, a little bit. You have control. Okay. So this is another slide that I added. So as a peer, I consider myself a peer. I have a lived or living experience with substance use. This is how we term peers within the harm reduction sphere. Now, I jumped a little further and got a little technical and actually looked for the Webster definition of a peer. And a peer is someone of equal standing with another person, belonging to the same societal group based on age, grade, status. This is just a dictionary. Sorry. It's been out of school a bit here. Okay, so, and now a professional is viewed as somebody who's belonging to a profession. So this is, we're gonna go into how we talked about why we did not choose to designate ourselves by profession here. That'll come up in a little bit. But a professional is often viewed within a paid occupation versus pastime, something worthy. This is what me and Marie do. We do try and provide our peers with an honorarium. Again, this is provided by private donors. These are individuals who recognize this need within Sudbury and donate money. And we have a little financial advisor who kind of distributes and keeps track of how many hours folks are doing. We all do this on our own because we recognize it's hard work. Professionals, skillful, competent, assured. This is a peer. A peer is skillful. A peer is competent. A peer is assured in their role within community. So I come here as a peer. I'm a peer because I have a lived experience, but I'm also a professional because I hold a degree in social work. I specialize in mental health and first aid, but I'm both. So I'm simultaneously, it's in constant flux. As a peer, our ability to turn work off at the end of the day it's far more difficult because a lot of our peers are still very active within that lifestyle. They're here volunteering, but they're also going home to it. Maybe their family is struggling with it. So that's one of the things I'd like to point out there. You can jump to the next one, Karla. So as a former substance user, I mentioned earlier, I'm also a social worker. I specialize in mental health and addictions, primarily within First Nations communities, both urban and remote reserve. So how do I view this? When we're talking about the peer and professional, this is something I really wanted to talk about and really highlight too Marie's role and peers with that lived experience within STOPS. So I look at that moral and ethical obligation we have. Morally, it's just that gut feeling of what is wrong, what is right to do. Ethical, we're bound by that as nurses, as social workers. For me, I do not belong to the College of Social Workers, but I am a social worker. I've studied everything that a designated social worker would have studied. For me, I mentioned earlier that by my community, primarily Sudbury, and Toronto is getting to know me, as a woman who walks in her truth, my truth is my lived experience. My truth is the abuses I've gone through, the things I've survived. Those are all what make me me. And I walk strongly in that, and I hold it, and I've done a lot of work to rise up. But I never forget, it was the street that shaped me and molded me and made me who I am. Successes and challenges, how do I navigate this? This is why we have Karla. I have relied on Karla quite a bit.
To be fair, I also relied on Crystal quite a bit and Marie. So continue, Crystal.
In those parts, because an individual like myself, yes, I am a social worker, and an individual like Marie, there's certain, we talk about street code. We talk about, I'm going to say it, certain things you do not disclose because you're going to be viewed as a rat on the street. If you're still living within that lifestyle, that's not a threshold you want to cross. So when I look at ethical obligations as a social worker versus moral obligations, that street code as a peer, this is how I balance it. When I look at confidentiality and the need to maintain confidentiality, I look at the 7 grandfather teachings. We have wisdom, love, honesty. Take a look at them if you're not familiar with them. When I look at confidentiality, I look at the teaching of honesty and love. That to me is loyalty on the street. But it also, I know the importance of keeping names out, keeping all this sort of stuff out. When I look at establishing trust with my community, that's grandfather love and honesty again as well. This is saving lives. This is having that knowledge of supply coming into the community and educating people on, hey, there's some not good stuff coming out. Be careful. You don't use alone. We always duty to report as well. That's love. That's wisdom. So when we're talking about it, you can jump to the next one, Karla. That's how I balance those. Designations. I got to get into this. When Karla called me, she goes, what's your designation? I said, designation? This is something that the conference had asked of everyone here. And I'm like, designation? Well, I have a BSW, but are you registered? And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Oops, apologies for the language. But so it became, I've gone to school for the 4 years. I'm studying my master's. I have training in violent threat risk assessment. I have all these little tiny acronyms that go at the end of the name. But at the same time, I didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel worthy enough. I didn't feel on level plane with my peers within stops. So how do I explain this in a way that everyone will understand? When we look at Western way of being and doing, Western concepts, colonial concepts, it's a hierarchy. There you have your peers way down there at the bottom, your drug using community, and then you have those ones maybe in recovery, and then you have your social workers and your nurses, and then your policymakers at the top. Now, when you look at Indigenous culture, you see a circle. Within that circle, we are all equal. We're relational beings. I rely on Marie's knowledge out there as a peer just as much as I rely on Karla and her knowledge within nursing and be able to address an abscess. That's not something I have, but that is so needed within this circle. No one person within this Indigenous way of being and doing, when we're talking about designations, no one person is more prominent than the next. We're all relational beings. And that is one thing that I hope to, and I got a text from Karla later and she's like, yeah, you're so right. Can we use that? And here we are. You don't have all the fancy little letters at the back of our names, but hey, we're all important. We're all needed. And this is what STOPS is built on. The relational connectedness of peer, nurse, social worker, and yes. So that's that. You can jump to the next one. And this is more Marie's slide.
Okay, so I'm very passionate about this work because it is also a part of my life. So I get a little emotional here. So my voice, our voice, people with lived experience, peers, need to be heard, and we deserve to be heard. With our knowledge and experience, we didn't go to no school. There's no hard knocks to learn our survival skills. I also come from an era where we didn't have naloxone. We didn't have safe consumption sites, overdose prevention. We were doing this all on our own in the privacy of our own home. We didn't have harm reduction supplies. We learned how to renew our needles on our own. We learned how to cope with a stimulant overdose versus a heroin overdose. We didn't have fentanyl at the beginning. I also come from the era of Hep C, HIV, AIDS, the era of crack. We are not just survivors or victims. We are a purpose to be heard and to be reckoned with. Because you can go to school for 10, 15 years and you still won't have the knowledge that we have.
I can attest to that because I have been in school for a very long time.
And we've been silenced and pushed because, don't listen to the drug addict talking. There they go again. They're, this and that. And yeah, sometimes I get very emotional and it may sound like I'm giving you crap or whatever, but it's like, we've been silenced. We've been talking quietly and nicely to your comfort level and had to put up with all of your decision making. Now, when we talk in the same level as you, we're not heard. But if I get loud and obnoxious to the point that you think I'm irate or combative, then you hear me. So the way I see it is that if a peer can make you uncomfortable, then I hit a nerve and I just did my job. So that's something to be taken into account. We also break the barriers of all the trauma and lack of services from agencies and organizations that where we have been mistreated, re-victimized, re-traumatized. So we try, and then also, and I'm not going to pick sides to the decision makers, shot callers, and then communities that are still struggling with substance use. We need, because not one behavior is better or worse than the other. Enough with the finger pointing, enough with the blaming. Come to the table, talk about your knowledge, talk about your experience, and let's come to a decision. Because these are all conversations that we've been having for decades. So systemics needs to change. And the lateral violence that I see of peers that are silenced in the workforce that knows what is wrong and can't speak out, can't volunteer because it may pose them risk to lose their job. It's saddening. It sickens me. I don't have no degree whatsoever. Grade 8 is all I got. But let me tell you, to know what I know and to live what I live, I like to challenge these shot callers like provincial people and federal people. Come and live 3 days. 3 days in our life. Leave your luxury shampoos behind and your keys and your change and your toilet paper, all those little finer things, and then find the means for a bed and everything else. And then say, well, that drug addict, if they really wanted to change, if they're homeless, they would stop. But you know what? A lot of the times they have to continue using and increase their drug use to make sure that their shit don't get stolen. So there's so many different things, right? What else? And as a peer, I don't need agency and organization to go out and hand out harm reduction and to educate. I got broad shoulders. I can handle it. So yeah, it's very, very important that, and why can't we get paid the same as everybody else that shows up at a meeting?
No kidding.
We give our knowledge and our expertise while everybody at the table is getting paid, but us. And you get your funding and all that other stuff on the backs of us. So enough of this, and we need to be respected and we need to be heard because we ain't going nowhere. Well,
I think definitely when we have a highlighted line here on the slide, and we were talking about, I'm still in the midst of my MSW studies, but when I think of, we do practicums within social work, peers within harm reduction, within safe consumption site, establishing anything, they're our practicum supervisors. I'm going to go to Marie. I'm going to go to a peer who's in active addiction to learn the ropes. I'm going to go to that peer to learn what I can and cannot do within this world. This is a peer's world. when we look at some of our volunteers, we have guys who have done pen time. We have guys within our team, and I'm particularly talking about my brother, who is able to observe and watch a situation before it even has a chance to pop off. He's able to sit back, observe, see the connection, exchanges, and we rely on that. We rely on establishing that trustful relationship with peers to keep our social workers, our peers, our volunteers safe out there. And when Marie had mentioned about getting paid equally, yes. I had worked within a consumption site within the Toronto area. And unfortunately, I got hired on as a social worker. And they kept me on as a peer. I talked about a relapse. The organization was amazing in being able to support me through that. They're a harm reduction based agency, but also that pay. Yeah, I feel that, Marie. I feel being hired on as a social worker, having a relapse or a slip, as happens when you live with addiction. That pay went down, and it's unfortunate, but I still had that same knowledge. I still had that same skill set, but I was no longer being paid as the social worker they had hired me on as. And that's the reality of it. I can back Marie in supporting that, and we have to be able to advocate as social workers, as nurses. And I've relied on Karla's credentials, if you will, at the end of her name, to be able to get what we need. Because we need that. We need those allies. And yeah, recognition versus action. Our peers are so emotionally involved because they have brothers, sisters, friends. So when they're at the hospital advocating for a sister on the street, they're viewed as hostile, aggressive. You get a social worker in there who's clearly not living that lifestyle. That dynamic and that communication changes. So we're relational, we rely on one another, and we need one another in order to be able to be successful in establishing anything for our drug using community. We rely on nurses, we rely on peers, we need each other in this.
I just wanted to add to another role that's very important from the peers is that a lot of the times we know the drug toxicity out on the street and all that quote unquote illegal activity when it comes to consumption use is that we know long before there's a warning or we know things before there's a public health notice about a drug toxicity out there, or we already know all this stuff. So when we bring it to the table, it's not taken seriously enough and it's not good enough to put a warning or an advisory out. Let's stop waiting for a corpse to put those warnings out. Listen to those street folks. When they're telling you A, B, C, and D, you need to take that into account and add that to your knowledge of your corpse that you are now examining or the drug that you are analyzing. Listen to the people. And I'm telling you, those conversations are big when you're holding and running a site. It's not just in your outreach and your peer runs and stuff like that. When you have these kinds of setups, you involved. You're not just sitting there observing. You are connecting with people. You know what I mean? And you'd be surprised the conversations that come up and the knowledge that these people know. And might I add, some of these people have bachelors themselves. So it just goes to show.
So our last slide before we end our presentation is just about the role of a nurse in the OPS. We're almost at our time, and I really think I think that what you and Crystal said and how you articulated yourselves is way more interesting and way more important to overdose prevention and response than this slide, because you can look this up. Like you can. Yeah. So
but I think too, like, just to highlight this, when we talk about wound care, there's a lot when you have a white nurse approaching an Indigenous little group of folks there, it's not always welcomed. So the importance of that diversity in your safe consumption sites and outreach groups, again, we see it so much within the Toronto area. But honestly, there is a lack of Indigenous representation within Toronto area of harm reduction workers and social workers. Again, I'm going to speak to the intergenerational trauma Indigenous people carry and hold. I would love to see an Indigenous harm reduction agency built entirely by, of, and for, within all aspects, child welfare and everything. But definitely, wound care, bridging those gaps, connecting with folks who may be a little further in the woods. And it's not to say Indigenous people are more woodsy, but the guys on our team are definitely bushmen and have no problem bridging that gap and notifying our nurse if there is a person within a tent within the outside of the city that requires wound care. And Karla's been amazing in being able to bridge that gap where, necessarily no other organization would go. So I just want to highlight that. Karla, you're amazing.
So to summarize, we are a great team, and we're all exhausted, but we are all grateful from what we can learn from each other. I've been in school a long time, fine, and I teach nursing students, fine, but this is the highlight of, and I'm a mom and I love my kids, they're awesome, but this is a very big highlight of my life. And I'm very proud to be a part of this. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your questions and your comments.
Miigwech, everyone.
Which
Thank you all so much. Lots of thanks in the comments. We got applause, just saying how very incredible you are and how incredible the work is you're doing, and lots of here's in terms of the pay equity and everything else that you're saying. So yeah, very great. Heard best presentation of the day a couple times. So very good job. I just wanted to remind folks to complete the session evaluation, which should be popped up on the top of your screen. And momentarily, there is going to be a wrap up as well if you go back to the main page of the PHI Conference. And there's also going to be networking sessions available there, a variety of different ones.
So the question was about, you all have such a great, strong sense of purpose and commitment.
I was trying to read that.
Marie doesn't have the best eyesight. So if you're still on, we'll happily answer your question. I wonder how you've been able to maintain team morale and commitment to continue working in the program with all the constraints you have in your budget. Has staff turnover been an issue? Has it been difficult to recruit staff? Have there been other staffing concerns? Are you reading our minds?
Coming into it, definitely. We are still out there on the street, but at very limited capacity right now. It's very difficult retention-wise. When we're talking about the honorarium, we're not a funded agency or organization. We're a group of peers and community members who recognize a need. I think for a moment, we even had a GoFundMe as well, just to get our trailer up and running.
We never always had an honorarium. We never always had an honorarium.
That was a big push from me, actually, because I saw a lot of our folks struggling. I'm a really good advocate when it comes to getting what our community needs.
I don't want to say no to Crystal. I don't know about you.
I'm a very hard person to say no to, but we rely on one another. We debrief. If there's a situation that hits close to home, we're definitely there. I want to say it's almost a sense of family. That's how I felt coming in. Families have their own dynamics and struggles and issues, and we're pretty good with taking space when we need to, asking to take space when we need to, when a loss has hit too close to home. And we're supported in that. I think if STOP's ever had the opportunity to become a funded organization, we'd be amazing.
We kill all the other agencies.
I think it would be great. I think it would be awesome. So just to kind of give you also a little bit of context of where things are moving in Sudbury in terms of overdose prevention and response, we advocated and pushed our public health Sudbury districts, like our health unit and the municipal government, to move to have an urgent public health needs site. So we were part of that application, and that has gone through, and it's been 2 months and we haven't heard anything. But we also advocated for the budget to come from our municipal government in order to fund that urgent public health needs site. So we have really brought forward the agenda of use of substances in our community, homelessness in our community, and the rights of persons who are living marginalized and traumatic experiences, and how we need to support each other. So yeah, we're hoping that we can scale back, or our service may look a little bit different once the urgent public health needs site starts. But we don't know. We just, we were meant to be temporary. We started to be temporary. That's the T in our name. And I don't know. I don't know where we're gonna go. I just know what we've done and what we're doing, I guess.
Yeah. And also, like, I don't know about anywhere else across Canada or Ontario, but just because you work for EMS and 911 doesn't mean you know what it is about responding to an overdose. Because I've got paramedics now coming to me and asking me what kind of, like, a benzodiazepine overdose is not the same as an opioid overdose. Know the difference. There's been a lot of issues with trigger happy on naloxone, and that's a reality. And I mean, people don't understand and realize the risks when you're trigger happy on this naloxone when it's not necessary or overuse, how you are potentially putting a person at risk of an overdose death. Because are you going to sit there with them for the next half hour until that naloxone wears off, and make sure that they don't double up, triple up, quadruple up on their next fix because now they're so sick from a naloxone use? So, I mean, there's a lot of that stuff, okay? Also, we don't even know what's in our drug supply most of the time. I'd like to see what they have out in BC here in Ontario, where they can measure your fentanyl and they can see the percentile. And like I said, in a site, you have a relationship with the people that come in. I don't like calling them clients. They're people. They're not clients. They're people. I am a person. I will not be, I'm not a client. Anyways, we need to know what's in our substances. We have all these fentanyl strips that are out there, but they're not being utilized, okay, by public health. And I'm putting this out there. I don't give a shit. Anyways, it should be out there. And it's not. You don't have to be a fentanyl user to overdose on fentanyl. You got people who don't use fentanyl that are strictly meth. They use crystal meth or cocaine or whatever, but strictly don't use fentanyl. But they got nothing to test or supply in. And then the next thing you know, we got a corpse. Had they had known they were doing fentanyl, I think it needs to be part of the harm reduction list when it comes to kits and handing out. It should not be an out-of-pocket expense.
But I also think the point that you're making, these exist in a lot of other communities. Everywhere. And we're still very behind. And we are actually ahead in terms of other communities, which to me is scary because there's so great of a need and such a lack of service that, we've literally been doing this our own time, our own money, our own blood, sweat, and tears for 2.5 years. Like, it's just nuts. Anyways, I don't know if anybody else left on the chat. But again, thank you so much. Thanks, guys. You can follow us on Facebook, Sudbury Temporary Overdose Prevention Society. That's our plug.
Christina lost her connection. This is Sarah stepping in as backup moderator. Thank you all so much. What a wonderful presentation. And yes, I invite everyone to head back to join the networking sessions if you'd like to, and hope to see at least some of you tomorrow. Thank you very, very much.